Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story. Story number 1. The desert at 3 in the morning looked almost kind, like a wide black ocean with waves made of sand and brush. Luke's truck rolled down the lonely interstate, its headlights carving a pale tunnel through the dark. The sky above was empty, no planes, no clouds, just a faint spray of stars and the thin crescent of the moon leaning over the horizon. Luke had been driving for 20 years and liked runs like this, long, quiet, no traffic to fight. The trailer behind him was full of produce bound for a warehouse 2 states over. Nothing special, nothing interesting, just another night. Yet something about this stretch felt a bit different. The CB had been quiet for nearly an hour. The last way station had been closed. No cars had passed in either direction. The world had shrunk down to the steady thrum of the engine, the faint rattle of loose items in the sleeper, and the soft hiss of the air conditioner. He checked the dashboard clock. 3:07 a.m. A green and white sign flashed by on the right. Rest area. 2 miles. Luke frowned a little. He knew this route well. That sign didn't belong. He didn't remember any rest stop between the town he'd left 100 miles back and the truck plaza that would appear just before dawn. Maybe he just never noticed it. It happened. Highways changed. Old exits reopened. New services added. Besides, he could use a break. The familiar, creeping fuzziness of fatigue was starting to blur the edges of the road. 2 more signs slid past. Rest area. 1 mile. Rest area. Exit now. He flipped his turn signal and eased into the right lane. The ramp curved gently down and away from the interstate, dipping behind a low rise. Darkness swallowed the highway behind him. For a moment, the only light came from his own beams, sweeping over scrub and sand. Then the rest area appeared. It looked ordinary enough at first glance. A low, single-story brick building with blue-tinted windows. A row of vending machines glowing like little glass altars along the front. A long strip of truck parking running parallel to the building and, beyond that, a separate lot for cars. Sodium lights bathed everything in a pale orange wash, but there were no vehicles. Not one pickup, not one compact car, not one other rig. The entire place sat under buzzing lights, waiting for travelers who had never arrived. Luke pulled into the truck lot, tires crunching softly over scattered gravel. He chose a spot close to the building and rolled to a stop. The engine's rumble faded as he killed the ignition. Silence pressed in, thick and immediate, broken only by the faint hum of the lights and some distant, irregular tapping he couldn't quite place. He listened for a moment longer. No wind, no insects, no far-off hiss of traffic from the interstate he'd just left. He told himself that was normal. Some nights were just that still. Luke grabbed his thermos and stepped down from the cab. The air was cool. Cooler than it should have been for a desert night in late summer. He could see his breath drift faintly in front of him as he crossed the pavement. The automatic doors at the entrance glided open the instant he stepped on the mat, as if they had been waiting. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed softly. The lobby was empty. A bulletin board along one wall displayed faded travel advisories and maps under curling plastic. A pair of vending machines blinked quietly over to the left, and a metal rack of brochures stood crookedly in one corner. Luke glanced at the wall clock above the restrooms. 3:07 a.m. That made him pause. He checked his watch. 3:11 a.m. He checked the clock again. 3:07. Unmoving. As if someone had painted the hands onto the glass. Mechanical failure, he thought. Old clock. Nothing more. He took a slow walk toward the restrooms anyway, shoes echoing too loudly in the empty building. The sound of his own footsteps chased him down the corridor, bouncing off tile and concrete. The men's room was bright and equally deserted. The sinks gleamed. The mirrors were spotless. Too spotless, he realized. Public restrooms this clean usually had some sign of recent use: water spots, a paper towel jammed in the corner, a stall left half closed. There was nothing, as if the entire place had been scrubbed and then sealed. He washed his hands anyway, mostly to do something with them. The water ran cold, colder than it had any right to be, numbing his fingers almost instantly. When he looked up, his reflection in the mirror seemed a shade too pale, the shadows under his eyes deeper than they had been in the cab. "Long night," he muttered to himself, though his voice sounded a little too loud in the tiled room. He dried his hands, threw the paper towel away, and stepped back into the hallway. That was when he heard it. A soft, stuttering click, like a light switch being flipped on and off somewhere in the building. It came from down the corridor, near where the vending machine stood, and it repeated every few seconds with an oddly patient rhythm. Click, click, click. Luke considered ignoring it, just walking straight back to his truck and continuing on. But curiosity nudged him forward. Maybe someone else was here after all, out of sight when he'd first come in. He followed the sound. The vending area opened into a small lounge with a few plastic chairs, a couple of tables bolted to the floor, and a row of machines offering drinks, snacks, and faded sandwiches. The corner television was off, its dark screen reflecting the lifeless room. Click, click. The soda machine's selection buttons were lighting up and going dark, one after another, as if an invisible finger were pressing each in turn. No coins clinked inside, no cans rattled in their slots, just the restless blinking of lights. Luke stopped several feet away. The buttons paused mid-sequence, every light suddenly on. For a breathless instant, the machine glowed with a full grid of choices. Then all of them went dark at once. The sudden blankness of the panel made the room feel colder. Static prickled along Luke's arms. He took a deliberate step back and told himself it was just a glitch. Old machines did that sometimes. Circuits shorted. Lights misfired. Still, his heart had picked up speed. He turned, ready to put the building behind him and laugh about it later, when a quiet voice spoke from the entrance of the lounge. "You shouldn't stay long." Luke half turned. A woman stood there, just beyond the threshold. She looked to be in her early 20s, wearing a faded denim jacket and jeans. Her dark hair hung in a loose braid over one shoulder. There was nothing unusual about her appearance, no dramatic shadows, no strange angles, but something in her posture was held back, almost like a photograph that had been carefully posed. "Didn't know anyone else was here," Luke said, his voice measured. She didn't move closer. "They don't like it when people stay too long." Amend? There was no context, no explanation, just that sentence laid in the air between them. "Who?" he asked. She glanced toward the ceiling, then toward the front doors, as if she were listening to something distant that he couldn't hear. When she looked back at him, her eyes seemed unfocused, fixed somewhere a little to the side of his face. "You should go back to your truck," she said quietly. "Before they notice." Unease tightened along Luke's spine. He'd heard plenty of strange things at odd hours, half-awake mutterings, travelers talking to themselves, people who had been on the road too long. This felt different. The girl's words were too calm, too precise. It was like she was reciting lines. He opened his mouth to ask another question, but the overhead lights flickered. Just once. A brief dimming that washed everything in shadow and then snapped back. The girl flinched. Her eyes sharpened, finally meeting his directly. "Please," she whispered. "Just go." For the first time, Luke noticed what she was standing in front of. A metal plaque, mounted on the wall, half hidden behind her shoulder. He took a step sideways to see it. The plaque displayed an old black and white photograph of the rest area, dated more than 20 years earlier. The building looked the same, though the trees were smaller, the signage slightly different. Beneath the picture, a small amount of text explained that the rest stop had been dedicated in memory of. The name snagged in his mind, but it wasn't the dedication that unsettled him. It was the group photo of the opening ceremony printed beside it. A crowd of people, city officials, and travelers clustered near the doors, all smiling for the camera. Near the center of the group, slightly off to one side, was the same young woman in the denim jacket and braid, looking exactly as she did now. Luke's throat went dry. He glanced back at her. She hadn't moved. The same jacket, the same braid, the same steady gaze, but the year under the photograph placed that moment more than 2 decades in the past. The lights flickered again, longer this time. The humming overhead grew louder, like a swarm of insects pressed against glass. The woman stepped back into the hallway. as if giving him space to leave. Luke didn't argue with her. He turned and walked quickly toward the entrance, resisting the urge to break into a run. The building felt suddenly narrower, the air heavier. Somewhere behind him, something metallic rattled. But he didn't look back to see which machine had shivered. The automatic doors opened with a groan. The cool night air rushed in, smelling faintly of dust, and something else he couldn't place, like old paper, or clothes that hadn't seen the sun in years. He crossed the lot toward his truck. Halfway there, he realized what was missing. The orange glow of the parking lot lights had dimmed. They still burned, but softer, weaker, as if filtered through smoke. Overhead, the sky looked lower. The stars smudged and indistinct. The hairs along the back of his neck rose. Luke climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine coughed, hesitated, then caught with a shudder. He exhaled when the familiar vibration settled around him. Instinct urged him to check his mirrors before pulling out. The reflection showed the rest area behind him, washed in its thin orange light. For a heartbeat, everything seemed normal. Then he saw her. The girl in the denim jacket stood at the edge of the truck lot, just within the glow. She wasn't watching him. Her head was tilted slightly upward, as if she were listening again to something he couldn't hear. The lights above her flickered once more. They stuttered, dimmed, and then, in a slow wave, went completely dark, one pole after another, like a series of candles being gently blown out. In the final moments before the last light died, the girl lifted her hand in a small, uncertain gesture. It wasn't quite a wave. It was more like a warning. Then she was gone, swallowed by the sudden black. The only remaining light came from Luke's own headlights and the glow of his dashboard. He didn't waste any more time. The truck rolled forward, tires turning a little too fast, eagerness bleeding into every motion. He navigated the short loop to the exit ramp and climbed back onto the interstate. The moment his tires touched the main lanes, the familiar sounds of the world returned. The distant roar of an oncoming engine far behind him, the faint whistle of wind against the trailer, the shimmering ribbon of headlights from a car cresting the horizon miles ahead. Luke caught a glimpse of a green sign flashing by his left window. Next services, 87 miles. No mention of any rest area, no mention of an exit. Just empty desert on the map in his memory. He checked the dashboard clock, 4:42 a.m. He stared at the numbers, then at the highway, then back at the clock. By his own count, he'd spent maybe 10, 15 minutes inside that building. Not more than that, yet more than an hour had passed. The CB crackled faintly, then cleared. Anyone catch that closure up ahead? Mile marker 233. Rest area's been shut down for years. Construction or something. They never reopened it. Another driver's voice, casual, half bored. Luke reached for the mic, then stopped, his hand hovering over it. The temperature in the cab felt normal again. The slow chill from the rest stop had begun to slide away, leaving only a memory. He glanced in his side mirror one last time. Far behind, where the rest area exit should have been, there was nothing but darkness. No orange glow of lights, no shape of a building. The interstate spun on, endlessly straight. Luke drove on until sunrise painted the sky with pale blue and pink. He didn't stop again until he reached the crowded truck plaza he knew, with its noisy diner and overweighted coffee pots and chattering radios. The ordinary chaos of it all felt like a blanket thrown over a bad dream. Only later, hours into the day, did one detail come back to him, quiet and unwelcome. On the wall in that empty rest area, just beneath the photograph where the girl in the denim jacket had stood smiling 20 years earlier, there had been a short dedication. In memory of those who lost their lives here, it had said, "Rest area fire, all occupants, 2:07 a.m. He had only glanced at it in passing, not really reading the time. But now, thinking back, the numbers arranged themselves in his mind. 2:07 had looked uncomfortably like 3. 7 inches, a quick, sleepy glance. 1 digit off. 1 digit that made all the difference. For the rest of his years on the road, Luke avoided that stretch of highway at night. When dispatch tried to assign him routes that would set him there in the early morning hours, he would casually request a shift, a delay, any change that kept him away from those miles. He never again saw the mysterious rest area. No signs for it, no ramp, no low brick building lit by tired sodium lamps. But some nights, when the cab grew quiet and the darkness pressed close around the glass. He would glance at his clock and watch as it turned over to 3:07 a.m. For no good reason, he would feel the faintest chill, like cool desert air slipping through a door that hadn't quite closed. And he would remember a young woman in a denim jacket, standing under dying lights, warning strangers not to stay too long in a place that, officially, did not exist anymore. Story number 2. Snow started as a faint dusting on Marcus's windshield, just enough to catch in the beams and melt away. The forecast had promised clear skies over the Appalachian Pass, but the mountains had a habit of ignoring forecasts. Out here, the weather did what it wanted. The highway climbed in long, patient curves. Bare trees pressed close at the edges of the asphalt, branches reaching like black veins against a pale sky. It was a little past midnight, and traffic had thinned to a slow trickle of headlights far ahead and far behind. Marcus rolled his shoulders, trying to shake off the stiffness of 8 hours behind the wheel. His truck hummed steadily beneath him, trailer heavy with consumer electronics bound for a distribution center across the range. He'd run this route often enough to know every runaway ramp and most of the cracked reflectors by habit. The green glow of the dashboard clock read 12:48 a.m. The CB had gone quiet after a lively burst from some eastbound drivers talking about a closed diner and a football game. Now, only soft hiss lingered under the static, like distant waves. A sign flashed by on the right. Pass Summit. 23 miles. Beyond that, another smaller sign, its reflective surface slightly dulled. Old Ridge RD exit. 2 miles. Local traffic only. He barely glanced at it. Old Ridge Road was the shortcut everybody talked about and almost nobody used anymore. Too steep, too narrow, and, rumor had it, officially closed after some accident, years back. His company policy was clear. Main interstate only. Snow thickened as he climbed, flakes turning into soft streaks that drifted toward the windshield. The wipers whispered back and forth. The GPS chime snapped his thoughts. Faster route available, the flat voice announced. Save 41 minutes, via exit 219, Old Ridge Road. Marcus frowned. He tapped the screen. The map showed the interstate cutting a long, looping curve around the mountain, while a thinner, pale line Old Ridge Road sliced straight through the center. Not happening, he muttered, clearing the notification. The GPS thought a moment, as if offended, then quietly recalculated. Outside, the snow thickened again. He watched the digital thermometer on the dash drop from 34 degrees to 32, then 30, icy territory. He eased off the accelerator and let the engine hold his speed. The CB hissed. Then a voice slipped through, clear and smooth. Northbound Freightliner, white cab, no company name on the door. How's that road treating you up there? Marcus's fingers froze over the wheel for a second. He hadn't keyed the mic. Nobody had asked for a radio check. Out the side mirror, he could see only his own trailer and the vague smear of whitened pavement. He reached for the CB mic slowly. "Who's calling?" he said. A low chuckle came back. "Relax, driver. Not psychic. Just sitting a ways behind you, watching you drift." Headlights are throwing a nice reflection off that polished back door of yours. Marcus glanced at the mirror again. Far behind, 2 headlights burned through the drifting snow. Too distant to make out detail, but steady, following his lane. No other vehicles. "Thought you might be feeling the weather," the voice went on. "They're saying there's a freeze and a closure up at the summit. Troopers are already setting cones. You'll be sitting in line till dawn if you stay on this road." Marcus's chest tightened mildly. He hadn't heard anything about a closure. "Where'd you hear that?" he asked. "Buddy of mine on the other side. Westbound. He said traffic's at a crawl past marker 210. You just passed 201? Marcus's eyes flicked to the mile marker standing ghost-like at the roadside as they drifted past it. 200. Close enough, the voice said easily, before he could answer. Old Ridge is your friend tonight. Cuts under the mess, drops you back on clean around 230. I'm heading that way myself. The GPS unhelpfully chimed again. Faster route available. Marcus exhaled slowly, unsatisfied with how unsteady it sounded. Company doesn't like us using locals, he said. Company's not the one stuck on a mountain in a snowstorm, the voice replied. Still calm, friendly. You sound like you've been running a long day already. How long you want to sit in neutral listening to other folks snore? It was the reasonable tone that bothered him. Too smooth. Too prepared. Appreciate the info, Marcus said. Think I'll stick with the safe. Bet. For a few minutes, silence returned, except for the faint whine of the wind against the cab and the steady swish of the wipers. The dark shapes of trees leaned closer to the highway as the snow strengthened, turning from soft streaks into a steady curtain. 1000 marqué 200 un slid past. Then the voice came again, quieter this time. Marcus, you don't have to be stubborn every time the road tries to help you. His hand tightened so abruptly on the steering wheel that his knuckles popped. He had never given his name. Static crackled briefly, as if the airwaves themselves were reacting. You got a good rig, the voice added unfazed. Nice truck. Be ashamed to park it for 6 hours because you're scared of a little old road. Marcus swallowed. His throat had gone dry. How do you know my name? He asked, forcing his voice to stay level. A pause, then too lightly. You wear it on your hat, driver. He did, in fact, have his name stitched above the brim of his cap. But he wore it with the bill forward, low over his eyes. In a dark cab. In a snowstorm. At night. You're being pushy, Marcus said, teeth set. Back off. The headlights behind him crept closer, brightening in the mirror. For a second, as they neared, he could almost make out the shape of the truck, a tall grille, squared-off hood, cab painted a deep color that might have been black or navy. No logo on the front. They hovered at a respectful distance behind his trailer, exactly the way a polite, experienced driver would follow in bad weather. If you want to turn, the voice said softly, you need to be in the right lane now. Exit's half a mile. You'll miss it if you wait. The GPS showed it too. A pale curve veering off to the right. Old Ridge RD exit, 219. The snow outside thickened, swirling in strange eddies. The visibility narrowed. The road ahead shrank to a tunnel of white. The dashboard clock read 1:17 a.m. Marcus watched the numbers without really meaning to. A minute slid by in his body, in his breathing, in the rhythm of his heart, but the display never changed. 1:17. 1:17. Edian Schutzhiefen. His skin prickled. Just a glitch, he whispered. The truck behind flashed its headlights once. Not a rude blast, just a quick double tap. The standard signal on bad roads when someone wanted to let you know the lane ahead looked clear. The sign for exit 219 loomed up on the right, half shrouded in snow. It would be easy, Marcus thought. Just follow the taillights of the truck behind him. Let someone else take point through the storm. Be off this mountain faster, away from whatever was brewing up ahead. His hands moved almost without his consent, easing the rig into the right lane. The ramp appeared, a dark mouth cutting away from the interstate, climbing slightly, edged with reflective posts that glowed weakly in his lights. The GPS map zoomed in, as if eagerly. Attaboy, the voice said mildly. Just stay in my tracks. Don't drift. They don't maintain this one much. The ramp curved and rose, angling away from the interstate. Snow swallowed any view of the main road. Within seconds, it was as if the highway had never been there. Old Ridge Road stretched ahead in 2 worn lanes, its center line nearly invisible under the whiteness. Tall pines crowded close on both sides. The sky above seemed darker here, as though the clouds themselves pressed closer to the mountain. Marcus checked the mirror. The truck that had followed him up the ramp had slipped ahead without him seeing it pass. Now, he saw only a pair of taillights in the distance, a dim suggestion of a tall, unmarked trailer. He eased off his speed, letting a safe gap form. The road beneath his tires felt different, older, patched in places, with a slight irregular sway. The CB hissed again. Careful on the next curve, the voice warned. They went over right there. Who did? Marcus asked before he could stop himself. Another pause, just a fraction longer than casual conversation allowed. Bunch of drivers, the voice said. Bad night. Black ice. Nobody slowing down. One hit the rail. The rest followed. Like dominoes. You don't remember that story? Marcus did. He remembered it as something half-whispered over coffee when he was still new to the road, and as a softer, sadder version his mother had told him when he was young. About an accident his father had been in, on a steep old mountain road that didn't exist on maps anymore. He had never connected that memory to this place, this name, Old Ridge. But now it latched together like a lock closing. Your dad knew this road, the voice said softly. He'd have taken it tonight. The words hit him so hard that for a second his foot lifted from the accelerator. He had never mentioned his father to anyone on this channel. Never, in all his years of driving. The truck ahead pulled a little farther away, yet its tail lights never seemed to shrink, as if they were always the same distance. Calming, reassuring, wrong. The guardrail on the right appeared, old and scuffed, its posts bent in places. His headlights swept across one especially damaged section, where the metal bowed outward, then abruptly ended. Beyond it lay white emptiness. His palms were slick now. Every instinct that had ever kept him alive on winter roads screamed that this was a mistake. He flipped the CB off with a sharp motion. The hiss vanished. The cab grew strangely still, the engine suddenly louder in the absence of the soft background noise. The clock still read 1:17 a.m. Ahead, a sign loomed out of the snow, reflective letters catching his lights. He slowed, squinting to read it. Road closed. Permanent. 2 miles ahead. No through traffic. The sign was new, metal still bright, bolts uncorroded. A thin film of snow clung to its lower edge, but the words were clear. The taillights ahead never wavered. His breath came short and fast. He thought of the rows of rusted trucks and old photographs, twisted together at the base of a ravine, of his father's face in a frame on his mother's mantle. Of a road that, everyone said, no one used anymore. Without letting himself overthink it, Marcus eased the wheel toward a small turnout on the left, little more than a widened shoulder half carved into the mountain. He downshifted carefully, letting the engine slow him, and came to a stop. The sudden stillness felt enormous. Snow pattered softly against the windshield. The wipers squeaked once, twice, then settled into their slow rhythm. He risked a glance at the road ahead. The taillights that had been leading him were gone. No red glow, no silhouette of a truck. Just white road fading into falling snow, curving out of sight. He sat there, hands locked around the wheel, heart pounding so hard it almost drowned out the engine. The CB was still off. Even so, faintly, impossibly, a voice whispered into the cab, as if seeping through the metal itself. "Don't stop, Marcus. You're almost through." "One." He stared at the dark CB unit, its display blank. The sound wasn't coming from there. Very slowly, he reached across and unplugged the power cable from the unit entirely. The whisper cut off mid-word. Silence crashed in. Marcus killed the engine. The sudden absence of vibration made his body feel weightless, like he was floating in his seat. He forced himself to move, to open the door, to step down into the cold. The air bit at his cheeks, but there was almost no wind. The snow here fell straight down, steady and quiet. His boots crunched in the fresh layer as he walked the few steps to the guardrail. He knew he shouldn't look, but he did. Beyond the bent metal, the mountain dropped away into a steep ravine. Trees clawed up from the depths, their trunks dark and thin. Halfway down, barely visible through the snow and branches, were shapes that didn't belong to the forest. Rust-red metal, broken rectangles, faded stripes, old truck bodies sprawled and tangled, piled upon one another at odd angles. Some were nearly consumed by the trees, trunks growing through shattered frames. Others looked newer, paint still clinging in strips, logos half visible. One logo caught his eye and refused to let go. It was a simple design, a silver mountain silhouette on a dark blue background. He had seen it once, long ago, on the side of a truck in a photograph. His father's truck. Marcus stepped back from the rail so fast his heels slipped. He caught himself on the cold metal, breath clouding in the air. For a second, the world went too quiet. Then, drifting up from the ravine like echoes trapped in ice, he thought he heard the faintest murmur of overlapping voices, broken phrases, pieces of calls for help, apologies, prayers too soft to make out clearly, but undeniably human. He clamped his jaw shut, turned, and climbed back into his truck. The clock on the dash blinked once, and jumped from 1:17 to 2:09 a.m., as if catching up on lost time. He started the engine. The familiar rumble steadied his breathing. He put the rig carefully into gear, and instead of continuing forward toward the closure sign, he began the slow, tense process of turning around on the narrow road, inch by inch, mirrors filled with snow and darkness. It took longer than it should have. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the cold. When he finally pointed the nose of the truck back toward the interstate, the snowfall lightened suddenly, as if some unseen line had been crossed. Within 10 minutes, the ramp back onto the main highway appeared ahead. its reflective markers clean and bright. He merged onto the interstate. The world felt different immediately. Other trucks glowed ahead and behind, their lights familiar, their shapes ordinary. The snow here was lighter, just a dusting. The sky looked higher. He checked the CB before plugging it back in. For a long moment after he powered it, nothing happened. Then, gradually, the usual low murmur of distant voices filled the cab drivers complaining about slow cars, joking about coffee, trading weather reports. Normal. "Yeah, they got Old Ridge locked down tight," one voice said as Marcus listened. "Gates and concrete barriers. Can't believe folks ever ran that thing," another voice chimed in. "Heard a guy say he saw a truck up there last winter. Said it tried to lead him on. Probably tired eyes." Laughter rippled through the channel, but there was an edge to it. Marcus kept his hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road. He didn't join the conversation. Hours later, sitting in a busy truck stop with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the smell of frying oil in the air, he looked up Old Ridge Road on his phone. Every map showed the same thing, a solid gray line labeled closed, decommissioned after a multi-vehicle incident 20 years earlier. Someone had posted old news photos in a local history forum. Marcus scrolled past them quickly, teeth gritted, not wanting to see too much, not wanting to recognize any faces. The last photo in the thread caught his eye anyway. It showed a line of trucks on a snowy mountain road, taken from a distance. Most were ordinary, painted with company colors and logos. But near the center was a rig that looked almost solid black, its markings indistinct, as if the camera hadn't been able to focus on it properly. Its headlights glared white, too bright for the film. The caption below it read, "Possible last image before closure, Old Ridge Road." He stared at it until the lines of the diner around him blurred. From that night on, whenever his routes brought him near any old mountain road, Marcus turned the CB volume down low. On nights when the snow began to fall and the dashboard clock slowed for just a second as it passed 1:17 a.m., he found himself listening for a smooth, coaxing voice, asking if he wanted a shortcut. He never took it again. Story number 3. The coastal highway at night could make a person feel like they were driving on the edge of the world. Dana eased her rig along the narrow strip of asphalt that cut across miles of dark water and marsh. On either side of the road, the world dropped away into blackness. Somewhere out there were reeds, slow-moving channels, and the faint suggestion of the ocean beyond. But in her headlights, it all blended into a flat, glossy surface that reflected pinpoints of light. Overhead, low clouds hid the stars. The air tasted faintly of salt, metal, and rain that hadn't fallen yet. She checked the dashboard clock. 1:29 a.m. The run was supposed to be simple. Overnight freight from a port city down the coast to a distribution center inland. She had run it twice before. 120 miles of two-lane and divided highway, a handful of small bridges, then a long causeway, and a final stretch of pine forest. Tonight, though, there were no other trucks in sight. No clusters of red taillights far ahead. No white glare gaining in her mirrors. Just her own rig, the low thrum of the engine, and a straight ribbon of road lined with reflective posts. The CB had picked up nothing but static for almost an hour. Even the usual late-night chatter weather reports, jokes, boredom was missing. She took a sip from her travel mug, the coffee inside lukewarm and a little burnt. Sleepiness tugged at the edges of her vision, softening the lines of the world. She turned the radio dial with one hand, hunting for something to keep her mind engaged. Most of the stations were empty hiss. Then, faintly, an AM frequency snapped into clarity. Lanes still closed following the collapse, a newscaster's voice said, crackling but steady. Officials are urging drivers to avoid the Old Bay Bridge until structural engineers can assess the damage. Dana frowned and turned the volume up. Reports of multiple vehicles involved, including at least one commercial truck. No confirmed numbers yet, but authorities are warning that visibility remains poor due to heavy fog along the causeway. She glanced at her own windshield. No fog yet, just a faint mist at the edges of the beams. Her GPS map showed a straight, familiar line. The Old Bay Bridge had been retired years ago. The new causeway ran parallel to where the old span had stood. She'd driven it enough times to know there hadn't been a closure reported tonight. The radio crackled. Static swallowed the rest of the report. A few seconds later, the station disappeared altogether. replaced by the soft hiss of empty air. She tried to find it again, but it was gone. Only distant music and muffled talk from other frequencies drifted in, none of them clear enough to bother with. After a moment, she shut the radio off. The cab fell back into muted silence, engine noise, and the low rush of air the only sounds. Up ahead, a small green sign appeared, half faded, its reflective coating worn in places. Old Bay Causeway, 10 miles. She didn't remember that sign being there before. She'd always known the stretch as State Route 17, or just the Causeway. Maybe they'd put the old name back up for nostalgia. Coastal towns liked their history. Dana rolled her shoulders and refocused on the road. The white lines glowed under her lights, unbroken, pulling her forward. To her right, occasionally, a gap in the low guardrail revealed a faint glimmer of water catching the beams and shivering. After a while, another set of headlights appeared on the horizon behind her. They rose slowly, the way a truck's lights did when cresting a gentle rise, then leveled out and grew. Company would be nice, she thought. Empty roads were efficient, but they let the mind wander. The headlights gained on her at a steady pace. She held her lane and speed, waiting for the other driver to pull out and pass. The truck eased into view in her side mirror, first a boxy shape, medium-sized, probably a straight truck rather than a full tractor-trailer. Its cab was an indistinct pale color. Along the side of its box, dimly lit by Dana's own lights, was the faded outline of some old logo. She could just make out the words, Pine, Shore Delivery, in peeling letters, and the simple silhouette of a pine tree. She felt a flicker of recognition with the name, though she couldn't place where she'd heard it. The other truck held position behind her for a minute or two, headlights glowing in the mirror. Then, without speeding up or slowing down, it was suddenly gone. Dana blinked, leaned forward a little, and checked her mirror again. Empty highway, no headlights, no shadow of a vehicle hugging her blind spot. She glanced at the dark stretch behind her, visible in brief flashes when the road curved. Nothing. The back of her neck tightened. Tired eyes, she told herself. Maybe the other driver had taken an exit she hadn't noticed. There were a few service roads and access ramps for maintenance trucks along this part of the route. She took a breath, sat back, and forced her grip on the wheel to relax. The dashboard clock read 1:47 a.m. She drove on. 5 minutes later, she saw it again. The same medium box truck, just beyond the reach of her taillights, easing up from behind. Same pale cab. Same faded logo. Pine Shore Delivery. The pine tree outline like a dark thumbprint. This time she watched carefully. The truck's headlight stayed fixed in her mirror, then slid slightly toward the left as if the driver were considering a pass. They lingered there, just at the edge of the lane, never quite committing. Then, in the space of a heartbeat, they weren't there. No turn signal, no flash of brake lights, just a sudden absence, as if someone had switched them off. A thin unease crept down her spine. She checked the GPS. The little triangle representing her truck still moved forward, mile after digital mile, toward the inland town waiting at the end of the line. Her fuel gauge sat where it should be. Her speed was steady. Nothing else was wrong. Ahead, a low fog began to gather, drifting up from the marshes and hanging over the road in wispy strands. The beams of her headlights caught it and turned it into a glowing haze. Visibility shortened. The world beyond the causeway dissolved into soft, shifting gray. Dana flicked on her fog lights and slowed a few miles per hour. The green sign for Old Bay Causeway, 10 miles, appeared again on the right. She stared at it as it passed. The same bent corner, the same rust streak near the bolt, the same scrape along the bottom edge where something had hit it years ago. Her pulse picked up. Maybe there were two signs with the same wording, she thought. One before the stretch, one closer to it. Highway departments did that sometimes. But the details matched too perfectly. She checked the odometer, remembering roughly where the first sign had been. By her estimation, she should have been at least 8 or 9 miles farther along than when she'd seen it the first time. The numbers didn't add up. Another set of headlights appeared in her mirror. They rose from the fog, steady and pale, and closed the distance between them. The outline of a medium box truck took shape, the faded logo on its side briefly visible in the shine off her lights. Pine Shore Delivery. Her hand drifted toward the CB mic by instinct. She hesitated. The radio had been dead, but the desire to hear another human voice, to have someone confirm that they too saw this other truck, tugged at her. She keyed the mic anyway. "Box truck behind northbound reefer on 17, she said, voice mild calm. "You planning to pass or just pacing me?" Static rolled through the speaker. No voice answered. The headlights behind her stayed fixed for a long moment. Then, slowly, the box truck eased into the oncoming lane, slipping up alongside her trailer. Dana leaned forward to catch a better look. The cab had no markings, no company name on the door, no DOT number. The paint was an uneven off-white, stained in places as if something had once been taped there and removed. The driver's window was dark. As the truck's front bumper drew level with her cab, Dana turned her head to get a look at who was inside. The cab's interior was shadowed. For an instant, she thought she saw a shape in the driver's seat, shoulders, a head turned straight ahead. But there was no detail, no face, no features, just an impression of someone there. Then, impossibly, through the glass, the interior of her own cab flickered. The reflection on the truck's window didn't show her sitting alone. It showed her seat occupied by two overlapping outlines, one faint and unfamiliar, sitting almost inside her, hands sharing the wheel. She jerked her gaze back to the road. The box truck completed its pass with eerie slowness. As it moved ahead of her, its taillights glowed a dull red through the fog. No license plate was visible on the rear door. The faded Pine Shore delivery letters loomed for a moment in her beams, then receded. Dana let it pull away. Within 30 seconds, the taillights blurred, dimmed, and vanished into the fog as if swallowed. Her heart hammered loud in her ears. The dashboard clock flicked from 1:47 to 1:31, then to 1:29 again, numbers sliding backward in a stuttering sequence before settling. She stared at it, then at the thin, pale line of fog wrapping itself around the road. For the first time in a long while, she thought about turning around and finding another way. But there were no exits here. No safe turnarounds on the causeway. Just narrow shoulders, drop-offs into marsh, and miles of low barriers. Her phone buzzed softly on the seat beside her, the vibration muffled by the hum of the truck. She picked it up at the next straight stretch and glanced at the screen. No service. The time at the top of the display read 11:03 p.m. She put the phone back down carefully. The fog thickened. Headlights appeared ahead of her now, on the far side of the divided highway. A car passed, its shape a gray blur. Another followed, its driver's silhouette briefly visible. The normality of it steadied her slightly. Then, in her mirror, the familiar pair of headlights bloomed once more, climbing out of nothing, drawing close. She didn't try the CB this time. The Pine Shore truck followed at a distance, matched her speed exactly, and never pulled out to pass. Eventually, without any sign of turning off, its lights simply dimmed and slipped away. The cycle repeated. The Old Bay Causeway, 10 miles sign. The fog building in waves. The box truck appearing, pacing her, then vanishing. Each time, the clock on her dash behaved a little stranger, digits lagging, jumping, or freezing for a minute, as though the electronics were struggling to decide what time it really was. On the third pass, she noticed something new. Beyond the guardrail, through a break in the low scrub, lights glimmered out over the water. Not the scattered pinpricks of distant houses, but a line of steady points, bright and white, stretching out in an arc. They looked, she realized with a jolt, like the marker lights on a long bridge. But the new causeway she was on was the only major structure still in use out here. The old bridge had been demolished down to its pilings, locals said. Some of those broken stumps still peaked above the water at low tide. These lights didn't belong to that. Her hands felt cold on the wheel. As she watched, the distant line of bridge lights flickered. A few darkened, others brightened. It was like watching a reflection ripple on disturbed water. Then they all went out at once. The Pine Shore truck's headlights flared bright in her mirror, so close now that they filled it completely. Her chest tightened. Something in her broke through the growing numbness, simple, stubborn refusal. At the next small service turnout she saw, marked only by a faded sign and a short patch of gravel, Dana eased off the accelerator and began to slow. Her tires crunched as they left the smooth asphalt and rolled onto the rough edge. She pulled fully off the lane, careful to leave enough room between her and the guardrail. The box truck's headlights swelled, then slid past her in the left lane without slowing. She watched it go. As it passed, she saw the driver's window again. For an instant, the glass caught her own reflection. This time, there was nothing else layered over it. Just her, pale and tired behind the wheel. The Pine Shore truck rolled ahead into the fog at a calm, steady speed. Its taillights glowed like faint embers. After a few hundred feet, they dimmed. They should have shrunk, grown smaller with distance. Instead, they seemed to stretch, blur, and then unravel, like threads being pulled apart. In the space of a blink, they were gone. The fog in front of Dana's rig shifted. It thinned, then parted in rolling shreds, as if a breeze had cut through it. Beyond, the road looked different. The reflective posts along the edge were newer, brighter. The dividing line down the center was crisp, white, instead of worn. And far ahead, in the distance, she could see the faint arc of tall, modern bridge supports concrete pillars rising in graceful curves, bearing the weight of the causeway. She sat there, engine idling, breathing hard. The dashboard clock ticked over to 2:13 a.m. and stayed there, behaving like a normal clock again. She checked her phone. Service bars glowed weakly at the top of the screen. The time matched the dash. For a long minute, she didn't move. Then she signaled, checked her mirror twice, and pulled back out onto the road. The rest of the drive passed in uneasy, perfect normality. Other trucks appeared. A pair of tankers, a flatbed loaded with construction equipment, a sleepy car that drifted over the line and corrected. The fog stayed light, patchy, and eventually faded altogether as she left the marsh behind and entered the shelter of pine woods. She reached the distribution center just before dawn, backed her trailer into the assigned dock, and killed the engine. The early shift workers moved around her, yawning, sipping coffee, complaining about the day ahead. She almost convinced herself it had just been fatigue. Weeks later, on a reset in a small hotel room off another highway, she found herself unable to sleep. Restless, she picked up her phone and started searching for local news stories from the coastal area. It didn't take long to find mention of the Old Bay Bridge. Decades ago, in dense fog, a section of the old span had failed. Several vehicles had gone off the side, including what the reports referred to as at least one commercial box truck. Later articles mentioned the new causeway that had been built parallel to the old route, and the lingering local legends that sprang up around the site. In one grainy black and white photograph, a line of strike-breaking lights stretched across the water, the old bridge shrouded in early morning mist. Just behind a cluster of cars was the shape of a medium box truck. Its side was turned away from the camera, but in the blurred reflection on the water below, the dark upside-down letters were just legible. Pine Shore Dell. The rest of the word vanished in the ripples. Dana stared at it for a long time. She never told the story to dispatch. She didn't mention the looping signs or the misbehaving clock or the way the fog had wrapped around her truck like something with weight and intention. But from then on, anytime a route took her near long stretches of water at night, she paid close attention to the road, the mile markers, the way time slid past on the dash. And when, now and then, a lone box truck with a faded logo fell in behind her on an empty highway, she watched it in her mirror long enough to see its driver's face before letting her mind relax. If she couldn't see the driver at all, if the window looked too dark or the shape in the seat too indistinct, she found a place to pull over, let it go by, and gave it all the room in the world as it went wherever it needed to go. Story number 4. The truck was older than most in the fleet, but it shone like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. Jason first saw it on a gray afternoon in late autumn, parked at the far end of the company yard. Most of the other rigs wore the same bright corporate colors and logos, but this one was a deep metallic blue with only a small decal on the door. The paint caught what little light there was and held it, the way still water holds reflections. "That one's yours now," the yard manager had said, handing him the key. "Picked it up at auction. We finally retired that rust bucket you've been dragging around." Jason had run loads for the company for 6 years, a mix of long haul and regional. He knew every squeak and rattle of his old truck. He also knew it was barely passing inspections anymore. Getting something newer, even if it wasn't truly new, felt like a promotion. He walked around the blue rig, checking the usual things: tires, tread, lines. The steps up to the cab were clean. The fuel tanks shone from a recent polish. Someone in the shop had clearly put time into making it presentable. The only odd thing was the driver's side door handle. The paint around it was worn in a smooth oval patch, as if someone's hand had rested there for years. He climbed into the cab. Inside, the truck smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something else he couldn't quite place, coffee, maybe, and a hint of pine air freshener that clung to the vents. The seat was adjusted a little too close to the wheel for his height. The mirrors were angled down. He thumbed the electronic controls, moved everything back, raised the column. The dashboard screen lit with the company's logo, then blinked to the login page for the electronic logs. Jason entered his driver ID, listened to the familiar sequence of beeps, and watched as the system accepted him. The home screen displayed his name in crisp letters. J. Harris. Status. Off duty. Below that, under a heading marked Previous Driver, a name was grayed out. T. Collins. He thought nothing of it at first. Just the last owner, one of 100 drivers who'd probably sat in that seat before him. The first few days went smoothly. The truck rode more quietly than his old one, with less vibration through the wheel. The engine pulled clean, the cruise control held steady, and the bunk in the sleeper was firm without the dips and lumps he was used to. On his third night in the new rig, parked at a crowded truck stop off the interstate, he woke with a start around 2 in the morning. For a few seconds he didn't know why. The cab was dim. The only light came from the soft glow of the clock on the radio and the narrow line of blue from the power strip in the sleeper. The hum of the fridge blended with the faint overhead vent. He lay still, listening. Something felt different. Very gently, the mattress dipped near his feet, as if someone had just sat on the edge of the bunk. Jason held his breath. He told himself it was the truck settling, the springs adjusting to his shifting weight. That happened sometimes on uneven pavement. But the dip stayed, a faint pressure just above his ankles. Not uncomfortable, not heavy, just there. He shifted slightly, and the pressure eased, as though whatever had been there had pushed up and moved away. He reached for the curtain that separated the sleeper from the driver's area and pulled it back an inch. The cab was empty. The driver's seat stood where he'd left it, steering wheel gleaming faintly. Outside, beyond the windshield, the sodium lights of the truck stop painted yellow pools across the rows of parked rigs. Jason let out a slow breath, told himself he was more tired than he thought, and went back to sleep. In the morning, as he adjusted his seat and mirrors for the day, he noticed they were a little off again. The seat had inched closer to the wheel. The left mirror was angled a fraction downward, as if someone shorter had sat there and tweaked it. He frowned, then shrugged. Maybe one of the mechanics had moved it while checking something overnight. It happened. He grabbed his coffee, fired up the engine, and pulled onto the highway. The first truly odd thing happened a week later. He was running eastbound on a long, straight stretch, nothing but flat fields and the occasional farmhouse lights in the distance. Night had settled fully, the sky a dark dome, no moon visible. The road ahead was empty. Jason set the cruise at a comfortable speed and relaxed his grip on the wheel. The hum of the tires and the soft sigh of the heater filled the cab. A faint chime sounded. He glanced at the dashboard. A small amber icon blinked on the display. A little figure, with a diagonal line across it. Passenger seatbelt unbuckled. He turned his head, slow, almost not wanting to. The passenger seat sat empty. Nothing on it, not even his usual stack of paperwork and a jacket. The belt hung neatly at its side, latched into the buckle where he'd snapped it earlier just to stop the warning chime. He looked back at the screen. The icon blinked twice more, then faded away. The chime stopped. He reached over with one hand and tugged on the passenger belt. Still latched, secure, no movement. He drove for another mile, feeling the skin on his arms pebble, then consciously laughed it off. Electronics. Sensors went bad. Wires loosened. If it happened again, he'd mention it when he swung through the terminal. The CB crackled softly with distant voices. The normal noise of the road were a comfort. 2 days after that, parked alone at a small pull-off surrounded by evergreens, he woke again in the dark with the sense that someone else was in the truck. No noise had startled him awake. No door slam, no air brake hiss from outside. Just the sharp awareness that he was not alone. He lay on his back, staring up at the faint outline of the ceiling above the bunk. There it was again, the gentle dip at the edge of the mattress, near his shins this time. Not quite the weight of a person, but more than the truck's natural shift. Along with it came something else, the faintest aroma of coffee. Not from the travel mug he'd rinsed and set aside before sleeping, but fresher, warmer, as if someone had just lifted a lid. Jason pushed himself up on his elbows and reached for the curtain. He pulled it aside in one motion. Nothing moved. The driver's seat was turned slightly toward the window, angled a little farther forward than he normally kept it. The cup holder beside it was empty. For a long moment, he stayed that way, curtain in hand, half up, watching the dark silhouette of the seat, as if it might resolve into a person if he stared hard enough. Eventually, he let the curtain fall and sat all the way up on the bunk. "Long day," he whispered, more to the quiet air than to himself. "Mind's playing tricks." He slid down to the floor and checked the locks on the doors anyway, out of habit, secure. The yard around him was dark, but the faint glow of another truck's parking lights shone 100 yards away. Someone else was out here, just far enough to be comforting. Back in the driver's seat, he adjusted the angle, noticing again how close it was to the wheel. He pulled it back to his preferred setting, checked the mirror, and sat for a moment with his hands resting lightly on the cold steering wheel. The next morning, when he logged into the electronic system, a new message flashed briefly on the screen before it transitioned to his standard home page. "Welcome back, T. Collins," it read, then stuttered, letters flickering. The words blurred, shuffled, and reformed themselves into J. Harris. He stared at it until the prompts disappeared. That day, during a fuel stop at a company terminal, he asked around the driver's lounge casually. "Anyone know a T. Collins?" he said, stirring powdered creamer into a styrofoam cup of coffee. "Name keeps popping up on my log, I think." A couple of drivers shrugged. One shook his head. Another, older man with a faded ball cap, squinted like he was pulling a thought from somewhere deep. "Collins," the older driver said slowly. "Terry Collins? Drove a dark blue sleeper, didn't he? Older truck. Real clean. Always kept it spotless." Jason's stomach tightened. "This truck's blue," he said. "Picked it up at auction." Had Collins listed as previous driver. The older man's expression shifted, some mix of recognition and discomfort. He set his coffee down. "Yeah," he said. "That'd be him. Terry had a situation last year. Parked up at a truck stop off 180. Middle of winter. They found him in the sleeper in the morning. Heart, they said, just didn't wake up." He hesitated, then added, "Shop talked like the company had his truck hauled out and sold off after. Some drivers didn't want to sleep in it after that. Can't say I blame them." Jason nodded slowly. The pieces clicked together with a quiet, unwelcome certainty. The worn patch of paint at the door handle. The seat always nudging closer. The faint coffee smell, with no source. Back in the cab, he sat for a long moment before starting the engine. "I don't mind," he said quietly into the empty air. "If you're still riding along." The truck's dash lights flared to life. Nothing answered, of course, but the quiet seemed to settle, like a room acknowledging someone has spoken. After that, the little things kept happening. Some nights, just as sleep began to pull at him, Jason would feel that light indentation at the corner of the bunk. Once, half awake, he thought he felt a gentle tap on his foot, no more than a nudge, as if someone were trying to wake him without startling him. He sat up, heart hammering, and blinked into the dark. A moment later, his phone buzzed loudly on the dash where he'd left it. A weather alert flashed on the screen. "Severe thunderstorm warning. High winds. Seek shelter." He looked out the windshield in time to see the first jagged line of lightning tear across the sky. In the distance, the blurred mass of rain advanced like a curtain being drawn. Jason moved to a more sheltered parking spot against the leeward side of a building, just minutes before the storm slammed into the lot, sending unsecured trash cans skidding and rocking some of the lighter rigs. The timing was exact enough that the back of his neck tingled. Another night, on a long descending grade with a crosswind, his concentration lapsed for just a second. The trailer drifted a foot too close to the rumble strip. Before he could correct, the steering wheel under his hands tugged, just the slightest pressure, guiding him back to the center of the lane with uncanny smoothness. His heart kicked. He steered deliberately, tightening his grip, and it never happened again. The E-log anomalies continued in small ways. A status change would register a few seconds before he actually punched it in. A pre-trip inspection he hadn't yet completed would appear as logged. Once, in the middle of an 8-hour sleep break, the system created a 2-minute, On-duty mark, stamped at 311, then flipped back to off. He had slept straight through. But that night, he woke with the distinct memory of someone standing briefly at the open truck door, one boot on the step, as if checking the lot before retreating to the bunk. He told no one about these details. They felt too delicate, like cobwebs that would fall apart under too much talking. The only night it ever tipped from eerie into truly frightening came late in winter, on a remote stretch where the nearest town was 30 miles in either direction. He'd been driving since late afternoon. Snow had spit on and off at first, then settled into a constant light flurry. By midnight, he'd found a wide pull-off plowed roughly beside the road, enough room to park safely for a few hours. He set the brakes, left the engine idling against the cold, and crawled into the bunk. The heater hummed. Outside, the world was muffled under white. Sometime in the darkness, he woke with a feeling of heavy drowsiness, thicker than normal. His tongue felt sluggish in his mouth. The air in the sleeper was warm, too warm. A light weight pressed against his shoulder, as if someone were leaning over him from the aisle. He tried to open his eyes. They fluttered, sluggish, vision swimming. Through the haze, he heard a sound he recognized immediately. The soft, insistent ding of the door alarm. The one that chimed when the driver's door was open and the key was still in the ignition. Ding, ding, ding. It made no sense. He always locked the doors. Always. The weight at his shoulder shifted, more urgent now, as though someone were shaking him gently. He forced his eyes open. The curtain between the sleeper and the cab had been pulled halfway back. Through the gap, he could see the dim outline of the driver's seat and the faint glow of the dashboard. The driver's door was open a few inches. Frigid air seeped through the gap, carrying with it a sharp, acrid smell, something like exhaust, metallic and faintly sweet. It cut through the heavy warmth in his lungs like a knife. Jason lurched, half falling out of the bunk, catching himself on the edge. His legs felt unsteady. He stumbled into the cab and shoved the door the rest of the way open. Cold night air flooded in, washing the smell out. He sagged against the seat for a moment, breathing hard, feeling the fog slip slowly from his mind. Outside, the engine idled steadily, a pale plume of exhaust drifting sideways. Snow dusted the mirrors and the hood. Nothing else moved on the road. He checked the trailer lines, the fuel cap, the stack. Everything looked normal. Back inside, after a long minute, he reached for the heater controls. His hand paused when he saw the small, subtle crack in the plastic housing near the floor vent. A faint discoloration marked the panel around it. Later, in a shop 2 days and many miles down the road, a mechanic frowned at that same panel and whistled softly. "Good catch," the man said. "This thing's been leaking exhaust into your sleeper for who knows how long. You're lucky you woke up. I've seen what can happen when someone doesn't." Jason thought of the open door, the chill air, the weight on his shoulder in the dark. "I didn't wake up on my own," he said under his breath. The mechanic glanced up. "What was that?" "Nothing," Jason replied. "Just glad it's fixed." After that, he stopped thinking of the presence in the truck as just something eerie. Whatever it was, memory, habit, something left behind with the paint rub on the door and the faint coffee smell, it had kept him from not waking up in the middle of nowhere. He started small rituals without really planning to. He left the passenger seatbelt latched, and the seat angled slightly the way he imagined Terry Collins might have preferred it. On cold mornings, when he poured coffee into his travel mug, he poured a little into a second one and set it in the cup holder on the passenger side for a minute or two before dumping it out. Sometimes, when the road stretched endlessly and the CB went quiet and the dark tried to press in a little too close, he found himself talking out loud. "You saw this stretch a lot more than I have, didn't you?" he would say. "Seems like you kept it between the lines." No voice answered. No ghostly figure appeared. But every now and then, when he made some decision he wasn't entirely sure about taking a different lane in bad weather, choosing one rest area over another, there would be that subtle tug on the wheel, that gentle pressure at the edge of the mattress, like a quiet nod. One spring morning, months later, as he pulled into a familiar truck stop and parked in his usual corner, Jason sat for a moment with the engine idling and watched the sun spill pink over the edge of the lot. He reached up, touched the worn oval of paint by the door handle, and smiled faintly. "Thanks," he said softly. As if in answer, the passenger seatbelt icon blinked once on the dash, chimed a soft, brief tone, then went dark again. He shut off the engine. The truck settled with a small sigh. Jason climbed down to start his day, leaving behind, in the stillness of the cab, the faint, lingering warmth of two people instead of one. Story number 5. The planes at night could make a person feel like they were the only one left awake in the world. Elena's truck rolled east across a flat, endless stretch of highway, its headlights carving twin tunnels through the dark. On either side of the road lay nothing but low fields, fence lines, and the occasional dark clump of trees. The sky was a heavy lid of cloud, no stars, no moon, just a faint suggestion of lighter gray at the horizon where a distant town might be. Her trailer was loaded heavy with coiled steel, chained and strapped, the kind of cargo that made her double-check every binder before she pulled away from the shipper's lot. It was a steady kind of load, no slosh, no shifting if it was done right, but she felt every pound of it on the small rises and dips. The dash clock glowed softly. 12:22 a.m. The CB was turned down low, just enough to hear if anyone called out about a hazard or a patrol. Mostly, it murmured with half-formed conversations, broken by static. She'd been running solo for years now. The road fit her in a way regular life never had. Nights like this were her favorite. No traffic, no rush hour snarls, just a long straight line and the soft hum of the engine. A green sign slipped past on the right. Way station 5 miles, all trucks. Elena frowned. Her tablet, mounted on the dash with her routing and company messages pulled up, showed the next way station as closed until further notice. She'd seen that notice earlier in the day, flagged on a dot app, with a note about construction and budget cuts. She tapped the screen with a gloved finger, checking again. Same status. Next station, closed. Out the windshield, another sign loomed in her beams. Way station 3 miles. Prepare to stop. The reflective letters glowed clean and bright. Not old, not faded. Okay, she said softly into the quiet cab. Somebody forgot to update a sign. She'd seen it plenty of times. Stations closed on the schedule, but left up their warnings for weeks or months. Usually the ramp lights would be dark and the entrance blocked off with cones or a lonely barricade half fallen over. She settled in and kept going. The land sloped almost imperceptibly downward. The road noise smoothed out. In the distance, a pale cluster of lights appeared on the right, low, rectangular. The familiar shape of a way station building. The glow from its windows was faint yellow, like old bulbs. Ahead, strung above the right lane, a sign flashed to life. Way station open, all trucks exit, speed 25. The electronic open letters blazed bright green. Elena's grip tightened on the wheel. Her tablet still showed the station as closed. She glanced at the speedometer, then at the ramp. A patrol SUV sat on the shoulder, just before the exit. Dark gray with a faint blue stripe. Its parking lights were on. As she approached, the SUV's headlights blinked once on, off like a reminder. She flipped on her turn signal and eased toward the ramp. It wasn't worth the ticket to blow past an open scale, no matter what an app said. The truck climbed the gentle curve of the exit, the roar of the highway dropping away as she separated from the main lanes. The pavement changed texture under her tires, from worn interstate asphalt to a slightly rougher, newer surface. The way station spread out ahead, a low brick building with a flat roof, a glass-fronted office section facing the truck lanes, and a series of overhead lights illuminating the scale platforms. A small marquee sign announced the facility's number and the state insignia. It all looked older than it should have. The sign's logo was a style she recognized from childhood road trips, not from recent years. The building's windows had metal frames instead of the newer vinyl. The lights buzzing overhead were long fluorescent tubes, casting a pale bluish glow. But there was nothing obviously wrong. No broken glass, no boarded doors. The place was awake, alive with light, though only a handful of trucks were scattered in the lot. The sign above the first lane read, "All trucks, stop on scale." Elena rolled forward, following the painted arrows, and nosed her truck onto the platform. A light ahead of her still glowed red. On the side of the scale house, a digital display faced her lane. For a moment, the numbers flickered nonsense. 8, 4, 7, 2, like an old calculator being shaken. Then they resolved into a clear total. Her combined weight showed exactly 4,000 pounds heavier than her paperwork said. She frowned hard. She'd scaled the load back at the shipper's private scale. She knew the numbers. She was under the limit. but not by much steel. Didn't leave a lot of cushion. An extra 4,000 would push her right over. The red light stayed red. She glanced toward the glass of the scale house. Inside, a man in a faded uniform shirt sat at a desk beneath a buzzing ceiling light. He looked up, then waved her forward sharply and tapped at something on his counter. Then pointed to the parking area beyond. The light flipped to green. Elena rolled off the scale and into the lot, following the signs for driver inspection. She chose a space near a sodium vapor lamp, its orange glare flattening everything into 2 colors. She set the brake, checked that her paperwork was in order, and climbed down from the cab. The air was cold enough to sting her nose. Somewhere beyond the reach of the lights, a train horn moaned long and low, then faded. Inside the scale house, the smell hit her first. Coffee gone slightly stale, paper, dust, and a faint undertone of something metallic. An old wall clock ticked above the main counter. Its hands pointed stubbornly to 12:22, unmoving though her own watch read nearly 12:40 now. "Evan driver," the uniformed man said. He looked to be in his late 50s, hair mostly gray, under a state-issue cap, name patch reading Miller. His shirt was the older style, too thicker fabric, faded embroidery. A laminated badge clipped to his pocket showed his photo, but the plastic was yellowed. "Evening," Elena said, handing over her registration and bill of lading. "Your scale's showing me over. I'm legal on my paperwork. Let's take a look." His voice was calm, a little dry. He flipped through the papers with an old habit's efficiency. His eyes moved like someone who'd read 1,000 of these, and could find what he needed by touch alone. "Coiled steel," he said. "Those'll put gray in your hair. Or take you with them if you're not careful," she replied lightly. He glanced up at her with a quick, assessing look, as if measuring something only he understood. "Dispatcher pushing you on the clock?" he asked. "Isn't he always?" she said. One corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. He turned to an ancient-looking terminal on the counter. Its monitor was a thick, humming box, the brand logo almost worn off. Green characters glowed on a black background. "That system still work?" she asked, more to fill the quiet than anything. "Works fine," he said. "Better than most of the new ones. They break if you look at them funny." He typed something. A printer on the side spat out a narrow strip of paper, edges perforated. He tore it free and handed it to her. "Overweight," it read in stark black letters. 4,000 lb over gross. Date 11/14. Under that, her truck number, her trailer number, her name, spelled correctly, her company. The only thing that gave her pause other than the fine itself was the year. The tiny printed digits read a date that didn't make sense. The correct month and day, but the year 20 years in the past. She blinked, thinking her eyes had skipped a digit. The second time she looked, the year was correct. Miller watched her. "Something wrong?" he asked. Elena hesitated. The room felt a few degrees colder. "Thought I saw a typo," she said. "Must have been me." He tapped the paper with one finger. "You're over. Probably scaled on an old unit, or shipper had a miscalibrated platform. Happens." "I scaled it myself," she said. "Twice. I was under." "You were under where you were," Miller said. "You're not under here. You can argue with the number if you want, but the asphalt doesn't care whose fault it is." Something in his tone made her swallow what she'd been about to say. In the corner of the room, an old police scanner sat on a shelf, its red LED display glowing faintly. It crackled with static. Then a voice slid out, thin and distant. "Eastbound mile marker 157, reports of a semi-rollover," the voice said. "Load of steel. Multiple vehicles involved. Unknown injuries." Elena's shoulders went tight. Miller didn't look toward the scanner. He stared at her instead. "That's not me," she said quickly. "I'm nowhere near 157. "Not tonight," he agreed. Another voice layered over the first on the scanner, like two radio operators talking at once. "Female driver, late 30s, trapped in..." The rest dissolved into a hiss. Elena let out a sharp breath. Maybe a laugh, maybe not. "Local accident?" she asked. "Something from earlier?" Miller took off his cap and smoothed a hand over his hair, slow. The motion felt less like a habit and more like someone stalling for time. You running hard tonight? He asked, trying to make up time. She bristled slightly. I'm within my hours. Logs are clean. I don't mean that. His gaze dropped briefly to the digital clock on her e-log device, still clipped to her belt. I mean up here. He tapped his temple. She looked down at the ticket again to avoid his eyes. The fine amount blinked up at her, unchanged. I'm fine, she said. Just tired like everyone else at midnight. He set his hands on the counter, palms flat. You ever lose somebody on the road? He asked quietly. Her throat closed up for a second. She had. Years ago. Another driver. Once more than that for a little while. Gone tilt on a bad stretch of mountain downgrade. The load had pushed through the cab. They said it had been quick. She never saw the scene, only the cold, clinical summary. How would you know that? She asked, voice low. Miller's eyes softened, something like sympathy breaking through the calm. Got a wall full of ghosts in here, he said. Some of them are drivers. Some of them are just moments. Warnings nobody took. He nodded toward a corkboard on the far wall she hadn't really looked at yet. It held photos, dozens of them. Some were printed from color printers, edges curling. Others were old Polaroids with handwritten notes along the bottom. Trucks, jackknifed in snow, trailers on their sides like fallen animals, dark streaks on guardrails where metal had been scraped and bent. Her stomach turned. Not from gore, there were no bodies in the photos, but from the weight of what they implied. Halfway down the board, one picture snagged her gaze and held it. A white tractor, its front end crumpled, lay on its side across 2 lanes of highway. Coiled steel had spilled from the torn-open trailer, enormous rolls lying in the median. The quality of the photo was fuzzy, as if taken from a distance in bad weather. The number on the cab door was smeared with mud and snow. But she knew that number. It was her current truck number. She walked closer without thinking. The note at the bottom of the photo, written in hurried marker, read, Eastbound 150, 7, 11/14. Fatality. The year looked wrong again. Old. It swam when she tried to pin it down. Behind her, the scanner hissed, voices overlapping. Female, approximately 40. Rollover. Still waiting on extrication. Her heart pounded. The room felt tilted, slightly off level. That's not possible, she said. That's not my truck. That's not... You turned in here this time, Miller said quietly. She turned back to him. This time? He held her gaze, and for a moment, she had the dizzy sense that the bright room had become very far away, like she was looking at it through the wrong end of a telescope. Most folks blow the sign when it says closed, he went on. They trust their screens more than their eyes. Keep the hammer down. Gotta make that appointment, right? He gestured toward the scanner. Then I listened to him call it in, he said. Over and over. Same curve. Same mile marker. Different names, different companies. Same mistakes. Elena swallowed hard. The ticket in her hand rattled slightly against her fingers. What are you saying? She asked. He sighed, the sound of someone very tired. I'm saying you don't go back out there. Tonight, he said. Not eastbound. Park it. Sleep in my lot. Drink some of that terrible coffee in the break room. Leave when the sun's up, when the air warms and the ice lets go and the rush hour fools are done bouncing off each other for a while. He held her eyes. You didn't get that chance last time, he added, almost too softly to hear. Herr Skeen crawled. The clock over the counter still read 12:22. The second hand didn't move. What happens if I ignore you? She asked. Maybe nothing, he said. Maybe you white-knuckle your way through and tell yourself later that some old scale guy spooked you for no reason. Maybe that picture on the wall stays with somebody else's number on it. He paused. Or maybe the board gets another pin, he said. I don't like adding them. The overhead lights hummed, bright and steady. The office felt completely normal. Phones sat on their cradles. A computer monitor slept on a side desk. A pot of coffee on a burner hissed quietly. It would be the easiest thing in the world to laugh, to shake her head, to tell herself this was stress and imagination and a too long day. But behind the humming, she could still hear the ghost of the scanner voice, saying female driver, in the same flat tone they used for left lane blocked and debris on shoulder. She thought of the stretch around mile 157 low dips, overpasses, patches where the wind gathered, She thought of the coiled steel behind her. Her hand loosened on the ticket. "You gonna write me up if I stay?" she asked, surprised at how hoarse she sounded. Miller's mouth twitched again. "Only thing I'm writing you up for is overweight," he said. "And that one's already printed." He slid a set of keys across the counter. The ring was attached to a yellow plastic tag with faded numbers. "Break room door," he said. "Bathrooms. Coffee. There's an old vending machine that might still work if you kick it just right. You park in the back row, out of the way. I'll clear it with the next shift." She stared at the keys. "Why?" she asked. He blinked, as if she'd asked what color the walls were. "Truckers keep this place spinning," he said simply. "Can't hurt to give one a better chance when the road decides to play with time." That last part should have sounded like a joke. It didn't. Elena took the keys. When she stepped back out into the night, the air felt different, heavier, cooler, like a storm was gathering somewhere beyond the horizon. Her truck sat where she'd left it, big and solid under the lot lights. She climbed in, eased it to the far row Miller had indicated, and set the brakes. For a long minute, she sat with her hands on the wheel, engine idling, watching the faint gleam of the highway through the gap in the trees. Out there, somewhere not too far ahead, a set of curves waited in the dark. She turned the engine off. The silence that rushed in was almost startling. Inside the break room, the coffee tasted burned, but it was hot. The vending machine grudgingly gave up a pack of crackers after she thumped it once on the side. The sofa was lumpy, but serviceable. She set her alarm for 6:30 a.m., stretched out, and stared at the ceiling tiles until sleep finally tugged her under. She woke to daylight slanting through the high windows. The break room clock still read 12:22. Outside, the lot looked washed clean, the air clear and sharp. Her truck sat alone. The few others she'd seen the night before were gone. A different officer was at the counter in the scale house now, younger, with a short beard and a newer style uniform. His name patch said, "Ramirez. Morning," he said. "You the one that stayed over?" "Old Miller. Left me a note." "Yeah," she said. "Thanks for that." He frowned faintly. "Miller?" he repeated. "You sure that was the name?" She nodded. "Why?" He rubbed the back of his neck, looking curious rather than spooked. "Weird," he said. "Miller retired. What, 8-9 years ago now? I trained under him my first month. Guy was a machine. They named the southbound station after him 2 exits down." He laughed once. "You must have gotten him on a visit. He still drops in sometimes, sits in the back, tells me we're doing everything wrong." Elena studied his face. He didn't look like he was trying to be clever. He looked confused that she'd seen someone who, in his mind, wouldn't be working night shift. The scanner on the shelf behind him crackled to life. "All lanes reopened at eastbound 157, a dispatcher's voice said. "Cleanup complete. Earlier accident cleared. Expect residual delays." Ramirez glanced up at it, then back at her. "Bad one," he said. "Pile up overnight." Truck hauling steel went over in the right lane. Couple of cars piled in. They had life flight out there. "You hear about it coming in?" She stared at him, feeling the blood drain from her face. "I was parked," she said quietly. "Here." He nodded. "That's good timing. State police were turning folks around for hours. Saved you some headache." On the corkboard, amid the collage of old photos, the image of the crumpled white truck was gone. In its place was a small blank square of faded cork, a single empty pin still stuck in it. Elena's gaze snagged on the bare space. "You changed something on that board?" she asked. Ramirez followed her look. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I cleared a couple of the really old ones last month. Miller chewed me out about it." He smiled slightly. "Said I was letting folks forget too easy. I told him nobody needed to see 30-year-old wrecks anymore." He shrugged. "Maybe he snuck one back up for you." She didn't answer. Outside, the highway hummed with morning traffic now. The sky was a pale, washed blue, clouds breaking apart. She climbed back into her truck, started the engine, and eased toward the ramp. As she merged onto the interstate, she glanced in her mirror at the way station. In the bright light, it looked smaller, more ordinary. The sign out front was the newer style after all. The brick didn't seem so old. Her tablet chimed softly. A notification from the DOT app popped up on the screen. Way station MM 140. 2. Status. Closed. She looked back. The open indicator on the marquee by the ramp glowed a steady green. For a second, the two realities sat side by side on her dash, closed and open like a coin spinning on its edge. Then the app refreshed. Status. Open. She drove east. A week later, curiosity dug at her enough that she checked the company's incident reports. Buried in the list was a brief note about a different driver from a different fleet, hauling steel, going over at mile marker 157 on the same night she'd stayed at the station. Minor injuries to the driver. Major damage to the guardrail. No fatalities. The official summary of contributing factors listed weather, fatigue, possible excess, speed. It didn't mention timing. It never did. From then on, whenever her route took her past that way station at night, Elena felt a subtle pull in her gut. Sometimes the station was dark, its signs dead, the ramp blocked by a row of orange barrels. Sometimes it glowed, open and humming. Once, passing at midday, she saw a man in an old-style uniform standing just inside the glass doorway, his hands in his pockets. He watched the stream of trucks go by with an unreadable expression. As she rolled past, the scale's side display flickered, its numbers blurring for a moment before settling. For a heartbeat, instead of the weight of the truck ahead of her, she thought she saw her own unit number scroll across the screen. She didn't stop that day. She didn't need to. But she did lift 2 fingers off the wheel in a small private salute toward the scale house as she went by. The scanner in the cab stayed quiet. The road unspooled before her, full of all the ways a person could go wrong, full of all the quiet, ordinary chances to get one more night to turn in where they hadn't before. Story number 6. They called it the 40-mile stretch, said it could play tricks on people, not because of tight curves or steep grades. The road itself was almost boring. A long, nearly straight run between 2 small towns in the high desert. No gas stations. No houses. Just scrub, rocks, an occasional fence line, and sky. But drivers talked about it anyway. Roy had been hearing stories about that stretch since he first climbed behind a wheel. CB tails traded over weak coffee at counters and under humming truck stop lights. Most of them were nonsense phantom headlights, hitchhikers who vanished, that sort of thing. The one that stuck in his mind was always about the radio. Out there, some nights. An old driver had told him years ago, you pick up people who aren't on your road yet, or aren't on it anymore. Like the air holds on to their last words. Roy had rolled his eyes at the time, but he'd listened. You didn't last long out here by ignoring the way other people's voices got quiet when they talked about certain places. Now, decades later, he was on that very stretch again. His rig hummed along the 2-lane highway, engine a deep, steady vibration under his feet. The trailer behind him was loaded with pallets of dry goods, stacked high but not especially heavy. An easy haul compared to some he'd done. The night had settled over the desert like a lid. No towns in sight. No distant glow on the horizon. Even the stars were mostly hidden behind a layer of thin, high cloud. The world, beyond his headlights, was a soft, black wall. The dashboard clock showed 1:02 a.m. He shifted a little in his seat, rolling one shoulder to ease a stubborn knot. The CB was on, volume turned down low, filling the background with a comforting wash of static and occasional bursts of distant talk. 40 miles, he said quietly to himself. Straight shot. He'd run this route plenty of times over the years. Enough that the once mysterious stretch had become almost familiar. His logbooks had lines of ink that traced this very segment again and again. Still, something about it never felt fully ordinary. He passed the first marker, entering county line, next services 47 miles. After that, nothing but short white posts at the shoulder and the narrow beam of his lights. 10 miles in, the CB sputtered and cleared. Radio check, anybody out there on 1 to 9? A voice asked. Roy's hand moved without thinking. He picked up the mic. Gotcha, he said, pressing the button. Loud and clear. He expected the usual thanks, maybe some idle talk about weather or road conditions. Instead, there was a pause, and then the voice came back, a little too relieved. Good to hear somebody, it said. Thought I was out here alone. You on the stretch too? Roy frowned slightly. Yeah, he answered. Eastbound on the 40. You? Same, the voice said. Name's Rookie. First time running it solo. That sounds stupid for a handle? There was a nervous laugh at the end. Roy's chest pinched unexpectedly. Rookie. That had been his own handle once, back when everything still felt new and the road seemed bigger than anything else in his life. He hadn't thought about that in a long time. Nothing wrong with Rookie, Roy said. We've all been one. You sound young. 21, the voice replied. Got my first company truck last month. A brief crackle. You eastbound too? Yeah, Roy said. Headed toward Danvers? You? Same. The driver on the other end sounded pleased. What mile you at? I'm just past 117. Roy glanced at the marker whizzing by his window. 117 stood in white letters against reflective green. That's me, he started to say. But the marker beside the road read 137. He blinked, frowning, and looked again. 137. Not even close. About 137, he said slowly. You sure on your number? A short silence hummed across the channel. Yeah, the other voice said. Just rolled past the sign. Maybe your eyes are tired, old-timer. There was a friendly edge to it, teasing. You sound, no offense, a bit older than me. None taken, Roy said. He was older. Early 50s now, gray at his temples. Lines at the corners of his eyes carved by thousands of miles and long, squinting days. Company got you on strict timing? He asked. More to keep the kid talking than anything. Don't they always? Rookie replied. Dispatcher wants me in Danvers by 6. Says the receivers there don't understand the concept of a delay. The last part came out in an almost perfect imitation of a bored office worker. Roy felt his mouth curl. They still say that, huh? He murmured. He'd heard those same words from a different dispatcher, in a different office, in a different decade. Outside, the land slid past in a flat blur. You got weather where you are? Roy asked. Pouring, Rookie said immediately. Been coming down since I left Haven. Fog trying to roll in too. Wipers can barely keep up. Thought this was supposed to be desert. Roy glanced at his windshield. It was dry. Not a drop. His wipers were off. The clouds above were thin, but not heavy. Clear over here, he said. Lucky you, Rookie said. Road slick ass. The radio popped, cutting off the end of the sentence. Roy adjusted his CB squelch, tapping the knob gently. The static settled again. His speed held steady. The engine's hum never faltered. He told himself they could just be on different segments of the same highway. Weather could change quickly out here, and the stretch was long. Still, the back of his neck prickled. What you driving, he asked. Company Freightliner. White, Rookie said. Fleet number 6427. She rattles like all get out over 65, but she hasn't quit on me yet. Roy's fingers tightened on the wheel. His own truck number, years ago, had been 6427. He had a photograph of it somewhere, in a shoebox with old pay stubs and faded fuel receipts. Him standing proud in front of it, younger, thinner, sunburned on his nose. The old logo on the side of the cab, a name that had gone out of business 10 years ago. He swallowed. What company? He asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Roadstar Logistics, Rookie said. Out of Plainview. You know him? Roy did know them. He'd spent his first 5 years with Roadstar, chased miles he shouldn't have, ran tight loads on not enough sleep. The company had folded eventually. Mismanagement, rumors of cutting corners. No one around him used that name now. No one wore those colors. It was a slice of his life sealed away in memory and old paperwork. He stared at the dark road. The number on the next mile marker came up too quickly. 138. How long you been out? Roy asked quietly. Left Plainview yesterday morning, Rookie said. Pulled a rest near Weldon, then pushed up through most of the afternoon. You? Been running a while, Roy said. Seen a lot of nights on this road. You ever heard weird stuff about this stretch? Rookie asked. Roy felt his hand tighten on the mic. Depends what you mean by weird, he said. The younger driver hesitated. The pause held more weight than his easy, joking tone earlier. Guys at the yard were saying radios get funny out here, Rookie said finally. Said you hear old calls, stuff from accidents. I figured they were messing with the new kid. The words dropped into the cab like small stones into deep water. Roy didn't answer right away. Boss said not to pay attention to that garbage. Rookie went on. Said accidents happen when you start seeing things that aren't there. Boss isn't wrong about that, Roy said. But he's also never run a night like this, I'm betting. Rookie laughed once, quickly, but it didn't have much humor in it. You get many bad nights? He asked. More than I wanted, Roy said. Less than some. You in a hurry, Rookie? Always in a hurry, the kid said, but his voice flickered on the last word. The CB crackled again, and Roy heard something underneath the static this time. A second voice, faint and overlapping, like an echo. It spoke the same sentence Rookie had just said, but a half beat behind, thinner, distorted, always in a hurry. Roy's spine went cold. What's the road look like up ahead for you? He asked, gaze dropping briefly to his own GPS. Long and boring, Rookie replied. Sign just said 120. Got a little bridge in a few miles, then that curve everybody talks about. There's no bridge at 120, Roy started to say. But in his mind, an old picture surfaced, unbidden. Rain pounding so loud he could barely hear his own engine, wipers slapping. The road slick and black. The glow of his dashboard washing everything in weak green. His stomach tight with fatigue. The sign for 120 sliding by in a blur. A low bridge belly cutting across a dry wash. A gentle right-hand curve. He remembered all of that suddenly, with such clarity it made his hands shake. He remembered something else too a night long ago, when he'd been 21, running this stretch alone for the first time. Company Freightliner. White. Number 6427. Rain. Fog. And a voice on the CB, older, steady. Ease off when you hit 121, Rookie, that voice had said. Water pool's there. Don't fight the wheel if it grabs you. Let it run straight. Then ease her back. He had done what that voice said. He had eased off. The truck had hydroplaned for a heart-stopping second. Then kissed the pavement again without taking him into the median. He had never seen the driver who'd warned him. Never got a clear handle. Just a calm, rough voice on Channel 19 that melted into static after. He'd told that story once or twice over the years, usually late at night at counters like this one, as evidence that not all the legends were scary. He had never connected that night to the ghost tales about the 40-mile stretch. The steering wheel felt slick under his palms. Rookie, he said, his voice coming out hoarser than he meant. What's your real name? The younger driver hesitated. Why? He asked. You a cop or something? Roy let out a sound that might have been a laugh. No, he said. Just asking. Lot of guys named Rookie out here. Hard to keep 'em straight. Royce, the kid said after a moment. My mom hates that I'm using Rookie instead. Says if she named me Royce, I ought to wear it. Roy stared at the reflective green of the next marker sliding by. 139. His birth certificate didn't say Roy. It said Royce. He hadn't heard anyone call him that in 20 years. The radio hissed. For a moment, the static thickened, like the sound of rain against a roof. In that brief wash of noise, he heard something else too. Tires slipping. A faint rising whine of rubber on wet pavement. Roads getting slicker, Rookie said. You sure you don't see rain out there, old-timer? Roy's throat was dry. He lifted his hand from the wheel and flipped on his wipers. The blades whispered across a completely dry windshield, smearing nothing, leaving it as clear as